What kind of world forces a woman to stand on an auction block and pretend she is not afraid? Pearl Harrington kept her chin high even as the dust swirled around her like restless ghosts. The Wyoming sun beat down on the wooden platform where she stood with iron shackles biting into her wrists. Her heart pounded, but she would not let the crowd see it. Not these men with hungry eyes. Not the cattle baron who saw her as another item to buy. Not the saloon owner who imagined a darker purpose for her. And not the auctioneer who shouted her value like she was livestock. 3 days ago, she had been the schoolteacher of Clearwater. 3 days ago, she had a small home, a classroom full of eager children, and a future she understood. But all of that had vanished the moment Marshall Jenkins showed up at her door, with papers claiming her father's debts were so deep that even Pearl herself had been counted as property. Now she stood here, in front of strangers, waiting for the highest bid. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the yard. $500 for the schoolteacher. She reads, writes, ciphers, and keeps books, a rare find for any ranch or establishment. The word establishment made Pearl's stomach twist. She kept her eyes on the mountains. She would not give them her fear. She was 24, and life had already taught her how to stand straight even when everything else fell apart. $550, someone yelled. Pearl knew the voice. Jason Blackfield, a man feared by nearly every rancher in the territory. He treated his ranch hands like tools, and the women he bought even worse. If he won, Pearl knew her life would be a cage. 600, called another man, the saloon owner. He smirked at her in a way that made her skin crawl. Pearl's fingers dug into her palms as the auctioneer raised his voice again. 600 going once. 1,000. The crowd fell silent, heads turned. Men stepped aside like a path had been carved straight through them. A tall cowboy strode forward, dust clinging to his long duster coat. His hat sat low, shadowing his face until he lifted his head. Then Pearl saw them. Piercing blue eyes that seemed carved from cold river water. A whisper rippled through the yard. Vaughn Nordstrom. Even Pearl had heard the name. A rancher with land north of Clearwater. Quiet. Hardworking. Known for fairness. Rumored to have no interest in marriage. Rumored to have a temper cold enough to freeze fire. The auctioneer swallowed hard. 1,000 from Mr. Nordstrom. Do I hear 1,100? Blackfield spat into the dirt. 1,100. 1,500, Vaughn said without blinking. Gasps swept the crowd. $1,500. Enough to buy land, cattle, or equipment. No one spent that kind of money on a woman unless their intentions were dark. Pearl's heart hammered, but her face stayed calm. 2,000! Blackfield roared. Pearl felt her pulse stutter. She knew what that meant. He wanted her, truly wanted her. And a man like Blackfield didn't fight fair. 3,000, Vaughn said. The words cut through the tension like a blade. Clear, calm. Final. The crowd murmured in disbelief. No woman was worth that in their eyes. Not even a schoolteacher. Not even one with green eyes and fierce dignity. Blackfield cursed loud enough for everyone to hear, then stormed off. The gavel cracked. Sold to Mr. Vaughn Nordstrom. Pearl's legs felt wooden as she was led down the steps. She had no idea what kind of man paid $3,000 for her. No idea what he wanted. No idea if she'd been saved or simply exchanged one cage for another. But when she reached him, the cowboy removed his hat. A simple gesture. Respectful. Unexpected. Miss Harrington, he said quietly. Mr. Nordstrom. Her voice shook only slightly. I believe I am now your property, she said, because the truth felt like a stone in her throat. A flicker crossed his face. Not pride, not victory, discomfort. Remove her shackles, Vaughn ordered. The assistant hesitated. Sir, we don't. Now. The steel in his voice made the man step back, fumbling with the keys. When the iron cuffs finally fell away, Pearl rubbed her sore wrists, trying not to wince. Vaughn handed over the money, signed the papers, then looked at her again. Do you have anything to collect? They took everything. I'm aware, he said gently. Come, we should leave before the others try something foolish. He helped her into his wagon with a touch that was strangely careful, almost gentle. He kept his distance as he drove away from the auction yard, the wheels bouncing over the rough road. For almost an hour they traveled in silence. Pearl kept her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, trying to ignore the thick knot of fear and confusion in her chest. Finally, Vaughn spoke. You must be wondering why I paid so much. Pearl stiffened. I assume you had your reasons. I did. And they're not what you think. With respect, sir, she said quietly, I've learned not to assume anything about men's intentions. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Fair enough. He guided the horses around a bend, and Pearl saw the outline of buildings in a valley below. A ranch, a large one. I need a teacher, he said simply. Pearl blinked. A teacher? For the children at my ranch and nearby homesteads. 12 of them. No proper schooling. I heard you were the best this territory had. Hope flickered in Pearl's chest, but she pushed it down. So you paid $3,000 for a teacher? Partly. The road dipped, and more of the ranch came into view. The main house, barns, cabins, all set against the backdrop of the mountains. What's the rest of the reason? Pearl asked. Vaughn exhaled slowly. That, he said, is something we will discuss when we reach Northstar Ranch. The wagon rolled toward her unknown future, the sky turning gold as the sun sank behind the Wyoming peaks. Pearl held her hands in her lap, her wrists still aching from the shackles, her heart beating a rhythm of fear and fragile hope. Whatever awaited her at Vaughn Nordstrom's ranch, her life in Clearwater was gone forever, and a new fate, terrifying and uncertain, waited just ahead. Pearl Harrington stepped down from the wagon with careful, steady movements, determined not to show how shaken she still felt. The sun had slipped behind the mountains, leaving a soft, golden glow across the ranch yard. Horses snorted from the corral, lanterns flickered in windows, and a cool evening breeze carried the smell of pine and wood smoke. It was quiet here, peaceful, almost too peaceful after the chaos of the auction yard. A tall, straight-backed woman with iron-gray hair came out of the main house. She wore a spotless apron and looked at Pearl with eyes that measured everything. Mrs. Whitaker? Vaughn called, pulling the brake on the wagon. This is Miss Pearl Harrington. The new teacher, Mrs. Whitaker said. Her tone was calm and practical. You'll be staying in the east cabin. Pearl climbed down without waiting for help. She wanted to stand on her own feet, even if her legs still felt unsteady. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Whitaker. The older woman gave a respectful nod. Likewise. You must be hungry after your trip. Pearl knew the pause meant Mrs. Whitaker understood part of what had happened. Come inside. Supper is still warm. Pearl followed her into the house. Vaughn's footsteps stayed close behind, silent but steady, as though he was making sure she didn't fall. Inside, the main house surprised her. It wasn't grand, but solid and warm. A stone fireplace, polished wood floors, shelves lined with books. A man who valued books was not the kind of man she feared. Mrs. Whitaker led her to the dining room. 2 places were set. Mr. Nordstrom thought you might have questions, the housekeeper said. I'll bring your plates. Pearl sat, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She felt like an unwanted guest in a stranger's home, unsure where she belonged. The door opened again. Vaughn came in without his duster, his face washed clean of trail dust. Without the shadow of his hat, she could see him clearly. Strong jaw, sun-browned skin, dark hair streaked with premature silver. Please sit, he said gently. She was already sitting, her throat tightened, but she said nothing. Mrs. Whitaker served the food, roast beef, potatoes, warm bread. The smell made Pearl's stomach clench. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Eat, Vaughn said softly. We'll talk after. She hesitated out of pride, but hunger won. She ate slowly, trying to keep her movements graceful. But the food tasted like heaven, and she hadn't felt this safe or this confused in a long time. When she finished, Vaughn pushed his own plate aside. You said we would discuss the rest of your reasons, Pearl said quietly, for buying me. Yes. He reached into a drawer at the side of the room and pulled out a folded paper. "I bought your freedom." She flinched at the word freedom. Vaughn handed her the document. "Read the last part." Pearl's eyes moved across the neat handwriting. At the bottom, she found the words he meant. "The bearer of this document, Vaughn Nordstrom, hereby transfers all rights and ownership of Pearl Harrington to herself, effective immediately upon her signature." Pearl froze. She looked up at him. "I don't understand." "I'm giving you your freedom," he said calmly. "You don't belong to me. You don't belong to anyone." Her heart hammered so hard she felt it in her fingertips. "But why?" she whispered. "Because your father was an honest man who was ruined by someone with power and money. Because what happened to you was not justice. Because no person should be owned." His eyes didn't waver. "And because I owed your father more than money could repay." Pearl swallowed. "You knew my father?" "Yes, we were partners once." Her vision blurred as emotion rushed up her throat. He handed her a pen. "Sign it, and you walk out of here a free woman." Her hand trembled as she dipped the pen in ink. With one careful stroke after another, she wrote, "Pearl Harrington." The moment she finished, she felt lightheaded, disoriented, free. Vaughn took the paper back, folded it neatly, and placed it in her shaking hands. "You are free to leave," he said softly. "If you want, I'll provide money for safe travel." Pearl stared at him. "Leave? And go where?" "I have nothing." "You have a skill this territory needs," Vaughn said. "I hired a teacher, not a servant. I'd like to offer you a contract, fair wages, room, board, full control of the schoolhouse. But the choice is yours." Quote. Her chest tightened. For the first time in weeks, hope didn't feel dangerous. "May I read the contract before signing?" she asked. Vaughn smiled. A real, warm smile that changed his whole face. "Of course." He stood. "Mrs. Whitaker has prepared the east cabin for you. It's small but private. You should rest. We start early here." Pearl followed him out into the cool night air. The stars were brighter here than she had ever seen. The east cabin stood near a small tree, warm lamplight glowing from the window. "Mrs. Whitaker left fresh linens and a few things you'll need," Vaughn said. "If you require anything else, just ask." Pearl turned to him, unsure how to thank a man who had changed her entire life in a single afternoon. "Mr. Nordstrom, I don't know what to say." "You don't owe me thanks," he said quietly. "Just do good work with the children. That's enough." He tipped his hat, then walked back toward the main house, his steps slow, almost reluctant. Pearl entered the cabin, a small bed with a quilt, a washstand, a rocking chair, a table, and, she froze, a little bookshelf with a few simple volumes. Someone had placed a folded nightgown on the table, clean, soft, a note beside it in neat handwriting. "Welcome to Northstar Ranch. Breakfast at 6:30. Versus Nordstrom." Pearl sank onto the edge of the bed. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, quiet, shaking tears of relief she had held back for too long. Tonight, for the first time since her father died, she was safe. And free. But freedom came with its own fears. What did Vaughn Nordstrom really want? What debt had he owed her father? And what dangers might still follow her to this quiet ranch? As she slipped beneath the quilt, Pearl knew one thing for certain. Her life had changed forever. And starting tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, Pearl woke to soft sunlight filling the small cabin. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch waking up, the distant lowing of cattle, the clang of buckets, men calling to one another as they began their chores. It felt like another world compared to the fear of the auction yard. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main house, clutching the folded contract Vaughn had given her. Vaughn was already seated at the table, a ledger open beside his coffee cup. He stood when she entered, surprising her again with a level of respect she was not used to. "Good morning, Miss Harrington. I hope you slept well." "I did," Pearl said. "Thank you." They ate breakfast as they discussed the school and the children who lived on the ranch. Vaughn explained the layout of the land, the nearby homesteads, and the families who would be sending their children to her. He never spoke over her, never dismissed her questions. He listened, truly listened. After breakfast, Frank Porter took her to the old storage building that would become her schoolhouse. It wasn't perfect, but it had strong walls, plenty of light, and shelves already stacked with books. She spent the morning planning lessons and meeting the children as they arrived to introduce themselves. Some were shy, some bold, all curious. By the time the sun sank low in the sky, Pearl felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. When she returned to her cabin that evening, she found a book waiting on her table. A simple volume of poetry. A note lay inside. Thought you might enjoy something familiar. V. Nordstrom. Pearl touched the book with gentle fingers. She didn't know what Vaughn was trying to say, but she knew it was not ownership, not control. It felt like kindness. And that frightened her more than anything else. The next days passed quickly as the school settled into rhythm. The children learned fast, and Pearl found herself growing attached to their bright eyes and eager questions. Vaughn often stopped by in the evenings to ask about their progress. He stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, his voice low as he asked about each child by name. He cared. He cared with a quiet strength that made her heart ache. But trouble was coming. Pearl felt it long before it appeared. One afternoon, when the sky had darkened with heavy clouds, Vaughn arrived at the schoolhouse looking more serious than she had ever seen him. "Pearl," he said, stepping inside, "we need to talk." Fear crawled up her spine. "What is it?" Quote. "Blackfield hasn't let it go." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "He's angry, he feels cheated, and men like him don't stop." Pearl swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "You stay close to me," Vaughn said. "And you don't walk anywhere alone, not even across the yard. Promise me." She hesitated. "Pearl," he said softly, "please." She nodded. That evening, rain pounded against the windows as Pearl helped Mrs. Whitaker mend shirts by lantern light. The warmth of the kitchen made her feel safe, though a part of her remained alert to every shadow. Then the door burst open. Frank stood there, soaked and breathless. "Riders," he said, "6 or 7, coming fast. They're Blackfield's men." Pearl felt her heart drop. Mrs. Whitaker grabbed her arm. "Come!" Quickly. Pearl was hurried down the steps into the root cellar. Mrs. Whitaker pressed a lantern into her hand, then something heavier. The cold handle of a revolver. "Do you know how to use it?" Quote. "My father taught me," Pearl whispered. "Good. Stay hidden. Stay quiet." The door shut. Pearl's breath trembled as she crouched behind barrels. She heard boots. Voices. Rough men, searching room by room. Then footsteps stopped right at the cellar door. The latch lifted. A tall man stepped halfway down the stairs, his face shadowed. "Well," he said, chuckling darkly, "what do we have here?" Pearl raised the gun with shaking hands. "Stay back," she warned. "You won't shoot," he said, stepping closer. "Ladies don't." The blast of the gun deafened her. The man staggered, shouting in pain. Before she could breathe, another shot rang out from above. The man collapsed, falling across the steps. Then, a voice she knew cut through her fear. "Pearl!" Vaughn. He rushed down the stairs and dropped to his knees beside her. His coat was soaked from the rain, his hair dripping, his chest rising fast with panic. "Are you hurt?" he asked, gripping her shoulders. "No," she gasped. I thought." He pulled her into his arms before she could finish. She clung to him, trembling. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. You're safe now." Pearl felt his arms tighten around her, felt his chest heave as if he'd been holding his breath for hours, felt his fear, his relief. And in that moment, she knew the truth. This was no simple kindness. Vaughn Nordstrom loved her. When she lifted her head, he looked at her with an honesty that broke her open. "Pearl," he whispered, "I thought I lost you." Her breath hitched. "You won't." He cupped her face in his hands. Rainwater dripped from his sleeves. "I can't hide it anymore," he said. "I love you. I've loved you from the moment I saw you stand on that platform with more courage than any woman should ever need." Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break. "Vaughn," she whispered, "I love you too." He kissed her then, a soft, shaking kiss that held everything they had both tried to deny: fear, hope, hunger, love. A promise. Around them, shouts echoed from outside. Frank calling orders, men being disarmed, Blackfield's attack falling apart. But in the dim root cellar, Vaughn held her as if she was the only thing in the world. "Pearl," he said, pressing his forehead to hers, "I won't lose you again, not ever. Marry me, and let me protect you. Let me stand between you and every danger this world tries to throw at you." Tears rose in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Vaughn, I will." His breath left him in a shudder of relief. He pulled her close again, his voice breaking with emotion. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God." They climbed out of the cellar together, hand in hand, stepping into the storm. The ranch hands were rounding up Blackfield's wounded men. Mrs. Whitaker hurried toward them, her eyes wide with worry. "Is she all right?" she asked. Pearl looked at Vaughn, their hands still linked, her heart beating with new certainty. "She's more than all right," Vaughn said softly. "She's my future." And as Pearl leaned against him, feeling his arm tighten around her, she knew it was true. Her darkest day had brought her to the one place she was always meant to be, beside Vaughn Nordstrom, as his wife, as a woman who now belonged to no one but herself.